Hey everyone, it's Danny. Welcome back to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited about today's interview with Dr. Cate Shanahan. She's someone who I have been eager to get on the podcast for many years, and she has a wealth of knowledge. She has written many books. She wrote Deep Nutrition, she wrote the FatBurn Fix, and she has a new book coming out today, the day this episode airs, called Dark Calories, and it is all about the toxic vegetable oils that many of us have heard about. If you haven't heard about this, then you are in luck. You are going to hear all about which oils we need to be avoiding and why. And if you already know about vegetable oils and why they're so bad, you are still going to learn so much in this episode. Vegetable oils are linked with so many horrible things, but one of the craziest things is that they can drive sugar addiction, poor ability to burn your own body fat, so they can lead to feelings of hypoglycemia. They can lead to insulin resistance, and they are actually very bad for our mitochondria. We don't dive into the mitochondrial bit in the episode, but one of the things about vegetable oils is that they are very high in deuterium, which is this thing called heavy hydrogen. It sort of jams up the motors in our mitochondria, which are the little machines in our cells that make energy. So they are damaging in so many aspects, and we're going to hear about so many of those today and how you can avoid these, but also why they have become such an epidemic and such an issue. They are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. They are very hard to avoid. And if, a lot of you guys are listening, you're like, okay, maybe I avoid seed oils, but maybe at restaurants, I'm a little loosened up, and I am too. But this information is to give you knowledge so then you can choose what you want to do with that knowledge. It's not to make you feel bad if you're making a decision. It's to help inform you and say, okay, you know what? This maybe needs to be a stronger boundary that I'm going to set for myself because now I've learned new information. So I hope that this podcast gives you lots of good information so you can, again, make the best choices for you, be the healthiest, happiest version of you. And sometimes that involves, eating the thing with seed oil in it. But I know that Dr. Cate would say that, if you're going to choose between eating sugar, smoking a cigarette, and eating vegetable oils, she would say vegetable oils is going to be the last one on that list that you should do. So really, really interesting take on this stuff as well. And let me just read you her bio quickly. Dr. Cate Shanahan is a leading authority on nutrition and human metabolism. As a board-certified family physician with over 20 years of clinical experience and a New York Times bestselling author of the FatBurn Fix, Deep Nutrition, and Food Rules, her expertise is fixing the underlying problems that cause metabolic damage, inflammation leading to autoimmunity, weight gain, diabetes, cancer, and accelerated aging. And her passion is to help people feel their best. So if you love this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review, all the things to help us know that you are liking this show, to help get it out to more people. And also make sure to head over to Amazon or wherever books are sold and get your copy of Deep Nutrition. Thank you so much for watching this show. I so appreciate it. And let's dive into the interview with Dr. Cate Shanahan. Dr. Cate Shanahan, it's such an honor to welcome you to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Danielle. It's great to chat with you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I am too, because you have written books about my favorite topics, and I've learned so much from your work, and so have many others. But I'd love to start the conversation with talking about what's coming out in your new book, Dark Calories, about vegetable oils and why these are such a big conversation right now. I feel like luckily, I feel that the message is getting out there a little bit more, but based on how much we are as a population consuming vegetable oils, I don't think the message has gone far enough. So can you talk to us about why they're such a big deal and they haven't been a bigger part of the conversation until now?
Yeah, so they're such a big deal because they are literally the thing that puts the junk in junk food. And they not only are they the primary reason junk food is unhealthy. When you add vegetable oils to regular food, you make healthy ingredients unhealthy. So everybody's going around talking about how diet is the bedrock foundation of health. However, we haven't had a real honest conversation yet about the fact that we are actually eating vegetable oils is 30% of our daily calories. So we don't even know what we're eating, right? If we're not talking about these things as in these terms, then we're not talking about what we're actually eating. So this is kind of the starting point of, I think, of all conversations around diet need to take this reality check of, 30% of our calories are coming from vegetable oils, and that's 80% of our fat calories, like the average person's fat calories. The vast majority are coming from these vegetable oils. And if we want to understand what's going on with anyone's health, we absolutely can't do it until we take an accounting of how these oils are affecting our cells, our metabolism, our bodies, our appetites, our hunger levels. And that's what Dark Calories does. This is my next book that's coming out in June. So if you're hearing this after June, it's already out after June 11th. But so that's what Dark Calories does. It's really the first book that puts vegetable oils front and center as the number one cause of the vast majority of our disease epidemics, and including metabolic issues, and including driving a lot of food addictions in a way that hasn't been discussed. Like, vegetable oils don't have a taste, so you wouldn't intuitively think they would change your appetites, but they do. And so that's so important to understand that. I devoted actually 2 chapters to that in the book.
Yeah, so let's talk about what are the vegetable oils, so we can be clear with that, because people are like, is avocado oil a vegetable oil? Is olive oil a vegetable oil? So let's talk about what are the vegetable oils and what makes them so toxic.
So there are 8 vegetable seed oils that I've identified as the problematic ones, and those are corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower. Those are the 6 that you need to memorize when you're looking at labels. So 3 C's and 3 S's for you if you're in the United States. If you're not in the United States, they don't do canola elsewhere, or Canada. They do canola in the US and Canada, but outside it's called rapeseed oil. And then the other 2 members of the Hateful 8 are rice bran and grapeseed oil, and these are mostly in the fancier restaurants because they're marketed as very healthy, which is not true. And so the reason I had to kind of list them out and give them a name, which I gave them, the Hateful 8, is that the term vegetable oil doesn't quite capture it, right? Because avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, these are healthy oils. They are also technically vegetable oils, right? And the same thing for the term seed oil. That doesn't quite cut it either because, technically nuts are seeds, right? So botanically it doesn't even make sense. But also sesame seed oil is a traditional culinary oil with lots of antioxidants, and it's actually healthy. It's on my good list. So another important aspect of understanding this whole conversation is, what are we talking about, and getting the term right. So that you can't just say seed oil and you can't just say vegetable oil, because that doesn't quite do it. And in order to put the 8 on the bad list, I've taken into account not just their fatty acid profile, which is the most important thing, but also how much antioxidants they have, whether or not they've been cultivated for a long time, because that impacts how we get the oil out of the seed, which determines whether or not it's a big, nasty industrial process that creates toxins or not. So those are some of the key things that you have to take into consideration when you want to understand which fats are good and which fats are bad. So other people, I'm making this point because other people may have different lists, but they haven't taken all these factors into consideration if they have different lists.
Right. So do you call them something else, like industrial seed oils, like industrial vegetable oils? Like, what do you call these, or just the Hateful 8?
The best term is really the Hateful 8, because the industrial seed oils isn't clear. Like, people don't know how many there are, and they don't know, so avocado oils might be produced in a factory too, and they are. Just the presence of the factory and the machines doesn't make them necessarily bad. It really comes down to those other factors.
Yeah. So I remember reading on your website the RBG, I think it is, so or refined bleach. Oh, RBD, refined bleach deodorized. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about this process and like how these oils are made and what why they're actually so bad?
Yeah, because so the reason that they're bad has to do with their fatty acid profile, right? So oils are fats. They're made out of fatty acids, and there's three major types of fatty acids. The type we've heard about a lot is saturated and maybe monounsaturated. You might have heard about if you've heard people talk about avocado oil and olive oil. And then the seed oils are very high in another type called polyunsaturated. And it turns out that those polyunsaturated fatty acids are very unstable. And so that when you extract them from the seed to make the oil, they deteriorate. And initially in factories when this happens, so when you run sesame seed oil or soy oil or corn oil or any of the hathalate through the extraction steps in a factory, getting the oil out, those steps involve massive pressure and high temperatures, like 500-600 degrees, being heated multiple times, and that is just going to make the crude oil essentially inedible because of the instability of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's just the chemical fact that the polyunsaturates and oxygen, not a good combination. Heat, also very bad for polyunsaturates. And why is it bad? Well, because these interactions create the toxins. So that's a key thing to understand because it helps you answer another question I get all the time, which is, so does that mean sunflower seeds are bad for you, or soy necessarily is bad for you, or corn? No, the answer is no, because in the intact seed, it hasn't been, the fatty acids have not been destroyed like that. And so the crude oil, that, the thing to understand here is that the crude oil is inedible and would be toxic. People can't eat it, right? But it gets cleaned up, and most of those horrible toxins are removed. Not all of them. So there's like 5% of certain types of trans isomers in there, which are some of them are highly toxic. In like some testing that shows, like they did organic canola oil testing, and there was 5% of these isomers in there that are not natural and have toxic effects in our body. And so that's starting, with a point of doesn't sound too bad, but the problem is what happens is as it sits on the shelf, that 5% magnifies because these oils are unstable, and any time they're exposed to light or heat or oxygen, you generate more toxicity. So it's a really bad idea to base our diet on these hateful eight oils that are so high in these unstable fats that just cannot handle the basic culinary practices or the basic circulation through our body's system, which is full of oxygen. Very bad idea to have so much of them. And yet that's what the American Heart Association recommends, and now that's what we're eating. Our food supply is full of it. Most people aren't aware yet, even though the awareness is hugely better than it was when I first started talking about this, like way back, over 20 years ago now. Nobody had any idea. But now a lot of people do, but they still don't really get the whole full picture of why these things are bad. So that's why I needed to write another book to try to give them a big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a video on YouTube where it's how canola oil is made, and it's disgusting. There's like a degumming process, and they're like, now we're putting the hexane, and now we're steaming it, and now we're removing all the like the smells and deodorizing. It's like, oh my gosh, like you can't even imagine. Oh, there's so many steps to make this quote edible, and then they bottle it in these clear plastic bottles, and it's sitting on store shelves under the light. It was heated up, like you said, to 500-600 degrees, so these bonds are breaking in the oil, right? And that's what makes them so unstable.
You got it, exactly. And like there's really no other food in substance in the food supply, and there's no other oils that get destroyed like that because you just don't need all that heat and pressure to extract them. And so then they aren't so disgusting that they need all those other disgusting steps and horrible things, like horrible sounding things like degumming. That sounds gross. Well, guess what? You know what comes out of that? Lecithin. Gum is like, that's the technical term for lecithin. So you look at your chocolate, soy lecithin, that's what they take off during one of those processing steps. So like fortunately it's in a relatively small amount, so it's not like a total deal breaker if your favorite chocolate has that. But I recommend looking for a different brand. Develop a new relationship with your favorite, a new brand of chocolate.
Wow, that is so interesting. I know that there are supplements that have that too. For the phosphatidylcholine, and it makes me question the sourcing of it,
Yes.
Yeah.
Not all phosphatidylcholine is created equal. That's sort of a parent category, and depending on which fatty acids are on there, they may or may not be toxic themselves. And so that's another thing. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of supplements just because there's so much that happens during the creation of these supplements that people don't learn about, people don't care about when they're selling them, because why they don't want to downgrade their products from healthy to reality check.
And there are quite a few of these hateful eight oils in supplements. You see it all the time with soybean oil carrier, sunflower oil added, like in like a vitamin D supplement. They're everywhere. So
they're dirt cheap. That's why they make their way into a lot of stuff.
Right. And so why are they so cheap? Is the government subsidizing these? And like why let's talk about the financial piece here. And we're not going to pull out our tinfoil hats because this is probably very well documented. So can you tell us, like, if these are so bad, why are they everywhere?
Well, for one thing, people don't know they're so bad, right? Mm-hmm. So they're everywhere, and the reason we don't know that they're so bad is because they were everywhere in the first place. Mm-hmm. So if we go back a few decades and understand the history of them, I think that's really important to do. So let's take soy oil, because soy oil is the most abundant right now. It's about 10 times more than any of the next most common hateful eight. So soy oil was first introduced back in the 19-teens or so, but it was kind of disgusting, and they hadn't quite managed how to clean it up and totally deodorize it and all this kind of stuff. So people didn't want to eat it very often. It was really like, last resort oil for people who could not afford anything else. And so then as time passed, agriculture changed. Agriculture changed hugely after World War II because we started, the feedlot practices had just begun. We started feeding cows and other animals soy meal, but we had to defat it, right? Because too much of that kind of fatty acid is not normal for the animals to process, and it would actually be very unhealthy for them. They probably wouldn't live. And it certainly had weird effects on their fats, on their own fat. So they couldn't feed, they had to defat it, meaning they had to take soybeans and squash out the oil, right? This is the first step in oil extraction. And so the meal is animal feed, but the oil that they can't feed animals, they clean that up and feed it to us.
That's gross.
So part of the reason it's cheap is because it was a byproduct. It was not usable, really. And so that's part of the reason. And then another factor is that it's a commodity crop, and it is subsidized, right? So I think those are two separate issues. So the fact that it's subsidized, farmers sometimes get paid, and there's a high incentive for them to grow it, which reduces the price. And yes, I think taxpayers are footing some of that bill. I don't pretend to understand all of it. I'm a doctor, not an economist, but I know that's an important thing. And another wacky important thing that somebody told me about, somebody inside the industry, is that because it's a commodity, it is publicly traded, okay? And so people can make bets on the price of soy oil and other oils. And in these huge companies that supply that make foods with these oils that get shipped, soy oil, by the train load, literally by loads of train cars pull up to these companies so they can get their products made and shipped out to food service all over the country. This is restaurants, like this is multi-billion-dollar companies feeding much of us on these oils. They own so much oil, they use so much of it that they can make bets on the price. They can what is it called? Short it, buy it short or whatever. That's like where if the price goes down, you make money. And they own so much of it so that if the price goes up, well, now they can sell some of the surplus and make money. So it's this money game that they can play because it's a commodity that plays a huge role in why companies choose to use these oils. So even though at the consumer level they are clearly cheaper, at the manufacturing level they are a money maker. Using those oils instead of olive oil makes the companies money. So they're indispensable. The companies would not be able to survive without these oils and without it, if it were to change from being a commodity to not being one.
Wow. And it's so interesting because it's a commodity and it's like it's like a food-like substance. It's not even like a true nutritious food, and they can sit with it because it's like that shelf stable that they can hold on to this stuff for so long. It's just like if you picked something out of the garden, it would be good for a couple of days. Like you can't do that with real food. So it's just such an interesting way of looking at this as like a commodity. It is that it's not an actual food, and that's really disconcerting. So let's talk about how Ancel Keys research kind of plays a role in why these oils were pushed. Because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we had heart-healthy canola oil, and we avoided saturated fat at all costs, and, saturated fat is going to ruin our cholesterol. So let's talk about the Ancel Keys study and cholesterol and how that also plays a role in the ubiquity of these hateful eight oils.
Well, these days we call the healthcare industry the sickness industry. Mm-hmm. The sickness industry was invented by Ancel Keys, and right, he's the father of the sickness industry. In medical school, I learned about him as the father of the diet heart hypothesis because I learned, and doctors still learn this, dietitians learn this, that saturated fat raises cholesterol, cholesterol clogs arteries, and that idea came from Ancel Keys. However, it's not true. And the opposite is true. And this gets me back to, like, why did I even do this? Why did I even write books? What got me into this? Well, 20-something years ago, I discovered that these oils had potentially toxic effects. And I was shocked and I felt deceived. And I had to get to the bottom of, like, why did I not learn this, for one thing, and why did I learn that saturated fat was the problem? Once I started looking at the chemistry, it became 100% clear that there was no possible way saturated fat could cause heart attacks or really any of these diseases, because the root cause of that had to do with oxidation, and saturated fat resists oxidation. So what does that mean? That means that chemistry tells us that chemistry gives us the answer to which fats are good and which fats are bad. And if you don't teach medical students the chemistry, they don't really have a clue. And Ancel Keys invented this kind of side science of using epidemiology, just asking people what they ate and looking later at whether or not they got heart attacks. That he invented that kind of, I call it should be like a pseudoscience. It's not really science, it's statistics, and you can make things come out however you want with that kind of methodology. And he did.
And
not only that,
recall studies are just, I'm sorry to cut you off. The food recall studies, like, this is how he's asking people. They're asking people for the data, like, oh, how much saturated fat, or how much beef did you eat last week? It's like, I don't even remember what I had for breakfast 2 days ago. So this is what this stuff is based on. That's what epidemiology kind of is when it comes to food. Is that right?
Yes, well, at least that's what it's supposed to be. But the way Ansel Keys did it was very murky. He did not adhere to any standards. Like you can't look in any of his publications and find out what questionnaire did he use. There was no standardization. Most of what he writes about is completely irrelevant. It's just like, oh, well, the people who work for the railroad company in Sardinia ate these foods for breakfast according to the survey. And the people in Finland, well, they eat a lot of butter. That's not how you do it. Yeah. So he didn't even have the basic standardization down. And so the kind of science that he did is truly pseudoscience, because he talked about it as if it were a science. He used a lot of scientific terms that impressed other people, lay people who didn't know any better, but he didn't fool the doctors of his day. Unfortunately, he was better funded than. So he had the media attention, and he was working with industry and just helping. His work helped the industry sell products, helped the industry make advertising claims, all based on his work. And a new generation of doctors that didn't know about all this hanky-panky that was going on behind the scenes, they just grew up with advertising. And advertising is powerful, right? So we didn't question it. I didn't question it. I grew up in the 70s, and I remember seeing advertisements in my father's magazines. He was a doctor. I remember seeing advertisements for corn oil margarine, right? Margarine made with corn oil. And I remember when the day that I saw it, I remember wow, I sure hope we're eating margarine and not butter, because it's that effective, right? Yeah. I was probably 8 or something. I could barely read. Yeah. But it was that effective. And I remember running to the fridge and looking to see what we had, and I was relieved that we didn't have that butter. That was the bad stuff, right? And then I went to medical school, and I never questioned any of that. And that's how most doctors are hoodwinked even before they go to medical school. And then the kind of pseudoscience that Ansel Keys created is never questioned and never called out as pseudoscience. And so the newer generations of researchers just cite Ansel Keys' work. So it's built on a house of cards, and when you examine it, the whole thing collapses. And so that's what I did back many years ago when I first started writing books and talking about this. And I was just so disappointed in my medical education, and so disappointed in the system that I had to be working in. It was so hard for me to continue working in the system. And I tried for another almost 20 years before I realized this is just hopeless. I have to go out and do something on my own because of how the system is rigged. And we haven't even touched on some of the ways that the system is rigged against the consumer and against our health. But there's a lot there, and it's important to know the full story so that you know how people in Harvard and doctors and dietitians who mean well are just not correct. They're just miseducated.
Yeah, it's very disappointing, and I had that same feeling when I was really sick. And I found, Rob Wolf's book, learning about real food. And I was like, we've been lied to. I've been following the food pyramid this whole time, eating my whole grains and my canola oil. And, oh, could this be the reason I'm actually sick and, getting 5 allergy shots at a time and on 4 or 5 prescription medications in my early 20s? I felt so enraged because I felt like I was trying to do what I was told, and I was extremely sick at a very young age, and luckily I've been able to reverse all those issues. But still, I had to go back to nutritional therapy school. I had to change careers to learn how to heal myself. And nowadays it feels so hard, and these vegetable oils are a big piece of that picture. So I would love to sort of go into now a little bit more of how these oils affect our bodies, and on that, cellular level, like what is going on? What makes them, like people say they're inflammatory. Like, is that true? Because they're like, oh, they're anti-inflammatory because at least, canola has omega-3s. So can you clear that up for us and kind of talk to us about this, how they affect us in our bodies?
Yeah, so, folks like you who've gone through a sort of outside the box education, they do learn something about these oils, but you and everyone else, there's not enough information out there because no one has really prioritized focusing on these oils and then put it in context of what else is bad out there. And I say this because it's important to prioritize. We need to know what role these things have played in making us sick. And I have become increasingly convinced over the years that these oils are the main thing making us sick. And the fact that not only do doctors not learn anything about them, even folks like you don't get informed enough about just what they do to our bodies, right? Because the information isn't out there. It's not all compiled into one place, which again is why I keep doing this, because I want to provide what I know. I want to share what I know with people so that they can prioritize properly. And what I'm saying is, what I'm getting at here is that these things are the first and foremost, most important thing to get out of your diet, because they will change. If you just do that, it will change so much about how your body works for the better. Okay, and so if you're not sure about that, I hope that after finishing, if you're listening to this, I would ask you to read Dark Calories, because I am sharing my rationale for saying this in the book. There's nothing in our food supply that can harm us the way that these things can, because we are literally building our bodies out of polyunsaturated fatty acids that react with oxygen. And just like in the factory when they react with oxygen under heat and pressure and become toxic, well, what I discovered very early on was that the same thing will happen. The same toxins form in our cells when we've been living off of these vegetable oils in the amount that we currently consume. So we are turning our cells' energy generating mitochondria into little miniature versions of industry. Like, it generates toxins and it can shut mitochondria down. And what does that mean? It means your cells are on the brink of death, about to not get enough energy. And what do they do to survive? Well, they slurp some sugar out of your bloodstream. And if you have problems with a sweet tooth that you can't control, if you feel hangry between meals, this is you feeling the effects of your mitochondria having been damaged or being damaged in real time by the diet of high PUFA, hateful eight vegetable oils that has changed the composition of your body fat and changed how your body generates energy. You can't use your body fat. That's what my whole book, the FatBurn Fix, is about. That we can't burn our body fat when it's for energy. We can't get energy from it. And so that makes us crave sugar, and eventually it turns us into insulin-resistant type 2 diabetics. And that whole thing that I'm discussing is based on, I call it the energy model of insulin resistance, because this is new. There's nothing out there that relates these oils to our food addictions. And I've put the pieces of the puzzle together, and like we were talking before this, I'm working now to get it published in an academic paper, because it will change how we treat sugar addictions, mental illness, because this greatly affects our brain function, and certainly how we diagnose and treat type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, I hope you're chatting with Chris Palmer about his work in psychiatry too. Like there's a lot of overlap here as well. So let's start with I want to walk through that process, because I think it's helpful for my people to understand. So maybe we start with talking about like What is healthy hunger versus unhealthy hunger?
Yeah, so healthy hunger is about nutrition. It's a minor feeling. It's a slight distraction. If you're bored, you'll maybe feel hungry when it's around your usual mealtime, or if you just think of food or smell food or somebody's talking to you about their favorite food or your favorite food. It's just a slight distraction. And it's really just about preparing your stomach for digestion. So you feel it often in your stomach, like a little light fluttering, maybe you hear some grumbling. That's healthy hunger, and it goes away if you don't eat. It doesn't get worse and worse. But unhealthy hunger starts in your brain. And a lot of people notice brain fog or irritability or anxiety. And that's happening because your brain is not getting enough energy. So the brain energy doesn't just affect mental health, it affects our appetites too. So yes, Chris Palmer is talking at great detail about how metabolism and energy is important for our mental functioning. And the issue is that we need sugar for our mental functioning when our bodies are full of body fat. And that's a real problem for people who are trying to be healthy, because they're addicted to sugar, not just for its taste, right? I'm sure you've had people talking about how it's drug-like. It's so addicting. It's drug-like. I was a sugar addict. In fact, that's why I got into this.
Peanut
because
M&Ms, right?
Yeah, peanut M&Ms and mocha frappuccinos and the caramel sauce that I used to put in my own coffee that I used to make myself with a quarter cup of sugar per
A quarter?
yeah
Oh my
per serving. Yeah. and I didn't think I had a problem with sugar.
Yeah.
So I can speak from experience as a terribly sugar addicted person that my relationship with food just is night and day different from what it used to be before I stopped eating these oils and started eating healthy fats. So like, it is so profound. There's nothing more important that you can do to get, if you are struggling with sugar, that before you have really much of a chance of succeeding in your struggles, focus, you have to get your metabolism where it doesn't need sugar. Because when your cells need sugar for energy, there's no amount of willpower that's going to keep you away from sugary tasting foods. It's impossible. We aren't, willpower is something that we actually need to have our brain getting energy for. Willpower comes from our brain. And so this is this terrible double bind we're in, right? Like if your brain isn't getting energy and you're sitting next to an office mate that you know has some delicious food stashed in her desk, or you have it in your desk, you need willpower to avoid it, but you don't have willpower because your brain isn't getting the energy that it needs. That's why I say there's nothing more powerful you can do than to stop eating these oils, which are deranging your body's energy production process, and start eating healthy fats.
Yeah, absolutely.
You start feeling better the very day that you start cutting out the oils and adding the healthy fats. At least a lot of people do. And almost everybody starts noticing a difference in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So one of the things that stuck out to me was when you said that hunger should energize us. So if you think about like a pack of wolves, you don't see these wolves just lying around hoping that just meat just strolls, across their path, that you're energized. And so a lot of us are not feeling energized when we're hungry. We're feeling these symptoms. We're feeling the dizzy, shaky, anxious, hangry, heart palpitations, irritability, sweats, like all those things. And that is and then the weakness, the fatigue, the cravings. And then this is causing us, this is that a mark of unhealthy hunger, and that is driving us to go seek out this quick energy. And I always say, or maybe I got this from your book, like a blood sugar crash is going to overpower your willpower every single time, because like you just said, that's your brain is struggling for energy. So that's not actual hunger, that's a brain shortage of energy. And so how do vegetable oils, because they get assimilated into our body fat, into our cell membranes, so how do they negatively impact our body's ability to burn our own fat for fuel, because that's sort of the solution to all of this, is like we're eating in a way where we're preventing this feeling because we can burn body fat, we can tap into liver glycogen, we can do all these other things. So how do the vegetable oils, the Hateful Eight, sort of do something different than a healthy, saturated fat from grass-fed beef, for example?
Your mitochondria generate energy for your cells. Then every single cell in your body has a bunch of mitochondria generating energy. And your mitochondria are basically the engine of your cells, recharging your little cellular batteries called ATP. Now, those mitochondria are very much like engines, really, truly. They actually have little parts in them that look like turbines. It's an incredible engineering feat of nature. And like any engine, like the engine in your car, there are fuels that are going to work in that engine, and then there are fuels that are going to destroy that engine, or at least take it out of action, be really harmful for it. So the same thing applies to our mitochondria, but it's the type of fatty acids. And so when we've been eating vegetable oils, we've got body fat that is full of the wrong type of fatty acids, the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And those fatty acids, they worm their way into the mitochondria. The mitochondria have to burn them. They can't say no. They can't not accept these polyunsaturated fatty acids. So between meals, when you start burning your body fat, your mitochondria start shutting down. And to save the cell has to bring in more sugar, and that drops your blood sugar. And this is why you feel those hypoglycemia symptoms that are hypoglycemia and pathologic hunger have the same symptoms. And I have a table in my books about, so you don't have to memorize that. There's 11 major symptoms, and you listed off a bunch of them. The brain fog, the shakiness, a lot of them have to do with adrenaline, anxiety, and stress hormones, the cortisol causing your brain changes and your brain function, malaise. They make you feel bad. And so that is the biochemical explanation for why you might feel hungry between meals. You might feel hangry and bad between meals, even though you have a lot of body fat. You have plenty of body fat. You should be able to burn that. Why are you hungry between meals? Well, that's the explanation, because your body fat isn't working to fuel your cells. And the thing is, body fat is the largest organ in our body, and essentially it's failing because of vegetable oils. It's, you know what I mean by failing? Its job is to energize our cells between meals, so we don't get pathologically hungry, and we don't need to snack all the time. But it's failing in its job because of the vegetable oils. And so that's why I say it is the number one most important thing. Nothing in your body can work right when you can't generate energy from your body fat. So it's truly the most important thing to pay attention to before you try to cut down sugar. I mean, if you've already tried to cut down sugar and you've struggled and you failed and you blame yourself, I want you to hear this, because it is truly a metabolic addiction. It is not your fault. I know everybody says that it's not your fault, but people blame themselves anyway. But really, it's not your fault. It's your metabolism, and your metabolism is damaged because of these oils. And nobody has told you. And that's why it was in my FatBurn Fix, and I put it in the Dark Calories book too. And I framed it up in a different way that actually helps you understand how it changes your moods. There's really so much to gain. You're going to feel so different. I myself went through this transformation, and I wasn't expecting it. And I barely noticed it as it was happening. But as I took myself off the vegetable oils and started eating healthier fats, I noticed my brain was working better. Did you notice that too? Did you notice more function?
I changed everything all at the same time, so it was hard to say. I took out all processed foods, but I see it with excuse me, with my clients all the time. That's the number one thing that we have them switch out. And yeah, your brain is just so much better when it's powered by more stable fats that help to run the mitochondria, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed things I would come home from work and I would be cranky normally, right? And my husband would ask me a question, a basic question like, oh, how was your day? And like that, it was too like general for me to process, right? Like if you asked me a specific question, I probably could have answered it. But I was just too tired and grumpy and didn't want to have a conversation about it because I couldn't even think through how to have a conversation about it. Like that's how it affected me, you know, and I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize it until I myself went through the transformation, and then I'd come home from work and I could talk about it. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is so much better. I'm more like a human. Yeah. I felt bad about myself because I couldn't have these basic conversations. And I thought it was my personality, you know, but I didn't realize it was just fatigue. It was a kind of mental fog that I was in, that I could still drive, you know, I could still decide to go for a run and do my simple habits that I had, but I couldn't do hard things. Yeah. And I thought it was my own fault. And I want you to hear, I want people to hear this because I'm sure that there's things that if you're listening, you've blamed yourself for when you just weren't really having a good day. Well, I would guarantee that your days are going to be better once you get more energy into your brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned like in your book that a lot of people blame themselves, like, you know, like you just said, like with the coworker, the willpower example, that it's sometimes we don't have the full brain energy capacity to have executive functioning, which is to plan a shopping list, go to the store, pick out the foods, go home, cook it, like get everything ready. Like that takes so much energy, and like your brain needs to really have enough energy to do this. And I like to talk about energy in two different ways. So the first is just kind of like, oh yeah, I have energy, like you said, to function, to do the things, or like, oh, my energy's dragging, I need another cup of coffee. So that's one way of thinking about energy. But the other energy is the energy that's coming from your mitochondria that are powering all your organs and your cells and all these processes in your body. So it's like, does my liver have enough energy to be a good liver? Like, does my heart have enough energy to do all the things it needs to do as a heart? So there's this other side of it that's more internal. And with our brain, because it's in charge of so many functions, we can see it a little bit more clearly when these functions start to drop off. So it's like, yeah, I can drive, I can, you know, answer some questions, I can hypothetically cook dinner. It's like, but do I have extra mental resources to engage in, like, you know, an open philosophical discussion? Do I have the brain energy to go to the next meal, to, you know, have willpower to plan my menu for the week? Like all these extra tasks, you can start to see like, oh yeah, we're going to the drive-thru tonight. Like I'm just going to veg on the couch and watch TV. Like you can start to see all these things dropping off. It's like, I'm not going to read a book, I'm going to scroll on my phone instead. So all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, my brain is lacking this like really extra abundant energy to do all these things I need to do. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, well, I love how you put that. Does my heart have the energy it needs to be a good heart? And the answer is no. But, you know, we feel it. We don't have that kind of perception in our heart. Like when our heart is just a little bit underperforming over a long time period, we actually get heart failure because of the way mitochondria get damaged slowly through vegetable oil. They literally cause heart failure, which is an epidemic among people over age 60. And so, but we can't perceive it. So we perceive it in the brain. And when you have that loss of executive function, when you have that like just, feeling of life is overwhelming right now, well, that's exactly where the processed food industry wants you. Because what are you going to do? You're going to drive through the Golden Arches. You're going to, do a takeout. You're going to go for the frozen pizza instead of making pizza from scratch. You're going to do whatever's easier because that's all that you can do. And it's truly all that you can do. So don't blame yourself. Just learn how to give yourself energy. And that's what I do in the dark calories. The last part of it is I walk people through a 2-week challenge that it's a challenge, but it's actually an easy challenge. It's a challenge to show you how easy it is once you get some energy to think.
Right.
Right. And so I just give you sample meals and I go through what you need to shop and some really, really simple things that you don't even have to cook. Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people just get so overwhelmed with the thought of, well, I know it's easy to open up a package, but I'm not really great in the kitchen. I never learned how to cook. So it can be overwhelming. So I have a lot of recipes that don't even require cooking, that allow you to just stand there in front of your fridge, take a few things out, and 2 minutes later, you've got a meal.
Yeah.
That's going to give you energy.
That's great. That's really helpful. And the cooking piece is challenging, and it's something I had to learn myself and, start slowly. There's a lot of great, helpful resources out there, but when you have the energy to do it, that's where I like what you said, start with something that doesn't need a lot of cooking, doesn't need a lot of prep, doesn't need a lot of thought, because you need to build up your brain energy stores. And then when I ask you, oh, okay, let's cook this meal, you're not going to be like, that's out of the question, I don't have enough energy for that. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I could take on this new task, new learning, because your brain will be working better. So for sure, I think that's a great extra addendum in the book. And I wanted to ask, because I've seen Ben Azadi talk about this after his interview with you, how long these vegetable oils stay in our body. Because I know that you've also said that, between like smoking and sugar and vegetable oils, like the hateful eight, that the hateful eight are the worst. And it has to do with how long it's in your body. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so they deposit in our body fat, right? And so if you have, say, 20 extra pounds you want to lose, well, you're going to be losing those vegetable oils. But until you get your weight down, you still have these oils in there in kind of a high concentration, most likely. Now, you might be swapping them out, right? You might not have to lose a pound. If you never lose a pound, but you start eating healthy, you're still going to lose them. But I just say that it's related to weight loss to show you that it is a slow process, right? Weight loss, you don't do it overnight. Like just because you started eating healthy, you wouldn't expect to lose the extra pounds. But so it's the same thing. Just because you start eating healthy, you still have your body fat is literally built out of those fatty acids. So they're still going to be there until you burn them off. And how long does that take? Well, we think it might be like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It has not been well studied, okay? So they studied fatty acids in general. They didn't study the polyunsaturates. It may be that polyunsaturates are actually we get them out of our body fat even sooner just because of how their chemistry is. They're, like I said, they wiggle, they worm their way into the mitochondria. They're wiggly. They get in and out of things a lot faster than saturated fats. So they may get out of our body fat faster. But on the other hand, we don't want to burn too much at once, right? And so this is kind of like the give and take here. So I'm giving you more energy, but I'm taking away your obsession with weight. Like at least I'm hoping I can take that away. And yes, we are obsessed with weight. Like when I wanted to lose weight, I was obsessed with it. I was like, why am I not losing weight? So I want to focus your measure of success on energy level so that you get more in touch with what your body really needs, which is energy, right? That's more important than how much you weigh. And then you will eventually lose the weight too. But like the give and take is I'm giving you energy, but I'm taking away that obsession with weight. I want you to not talk about that so much or think about it so much. And I'm sure you talk about this with your clients too, Danielle. It's like it's a lifestyle thing and we're in this for the long haul. But I have reason to believe, and you probably noticed this in the book, that if you are burning too much of your own body fat at once, rapid weight loss can be harmful when your body fat is full of PUFA.
Yeah.
That's how I should put it, not when you're burning too much of your body. Rapid weight loss could actually be harmful when your body fat is full of PUFA. And what happens is that you've been forcing your body to burn so much PUFA. Now your cells, your metabolism is maybe even more dependent on sugar. And so that has changed your insulin sensitivity, and it makes it even harder to lose weight. So that's why people feel like after they lose weight and regain it, then it's harder to lose the next time. Because you have made this underlying condition of insulin resistance potentially worse if you had rapid weight loss, right? So I really recommend that we stop talking about rapid weight loss. When I went to, doctors can specialize in we call it obesity medicine, right? And we learn from other doctors how to keep our patients motivated. And the key thing that I heard over and over again that I don't believe in anymore was you have to give people rapid weight loss or they won't stay motivated. Have you heard that?
I have, yeah.
And like I believed it at first, but then when I started understanding the chemistry and realizing all the problems people were facing and all the other research showing that, gee, it seems like when people lose weight and then regain it, now they are somehow more metabolically worse off and it's harder to lose weight. Well, you can understand that when you understand what the PUFAs do to your mitochondria and how it causes insulin resistance and how insulin resistance makes you build fat and makes it very hard to burn the fat. So that's the explanation as to how we're stuck in this vicious cycle of yo-yo dieting when we focus on rapid weight loss.
Yeah. Can you, I think you talked about like the overarching sort of steps, but can you talk about specifically how they drive insulin resistance? Maybe I missed that piece. I feel like I want to get a better grasp of that part.
Yeah, so I touched on how, I didn't say it, so you didn't miss anything. There's actually 4 steps, and I talked about, I think, 1 or 2 of them. So the first step is body fat, too much PUFA, cells get hungry for sugar, right? And eventually what happens is your brain keeps your blood sugar level higher than normal fasting, right? A normal fasting blood sugar level, we should feel fine when our blood sugar is 75. When you are starting to become insulin resistant, you can feel hypoglycemic. You can feel like you don't feel right when your blood sugar is 75. You need more sugar in your bloodstream all the time. That is profoundly unhealthy. And the only way that the body can actually sustain that higher blood sugar level is to ignore insulin. Because insulin regulates our blood sugar, right? Insulin tells our body to keep that blood sugar level under 90 fasting. But we have people walking around now with so many people with fasting blood sugars of 91, 92, 95. That's very mild early insulin resistance, because the only way that our body can keep that blood sugar as high as our brain wants it is for our liver to ignore insulin signal to stop doing gluconeogenesis, to stop breaking down glycogen. So insulin resistance begins in the liver. That's a little bit technical. It's probably more interesting for people who are like into.
That's what this podcast is all about. So keep it coming. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So that's like the nitty gritty. And this is again, I want to stake my claim in this theory. I call it the energy model of insulin resistance. If anybody else starts talking about it, they should call it Dr. Cate's energy model of insulin resistance, because it is mine. And unfortunately, I have to stake my claim in this because when I've been on podcasts before and talked about stuff, other people will say it as though they came up with it. I know they mean well; they're just trying to help people, but it doesn't do any service to not give the origin of the idea, so you can get the full story when you want to get the full story as a listener.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. Thank you. And then one thing that I think I also potentially missed the answer to, or maybe we just, maybe we didn't answer it fully, is these oils they cause an inflammatory response, right? So how are they inflammatory?
Very important question, and we didn't talk about that one yet either. So the inflammatory response is an intentional response to like trauma or infection. And the body causes, it's kind of like a temporary state of chaos where the body makes blood clotting happen more easily so we don't bleed to death. There's white blood cells drawn to the area. That's what inflammation is. And we have to understand that that is what the body does on purpose in order to understand how vegetable oils cause more inflammation. So what is triggering that response? Well, I said infection or trauma. What exactly chemically is that? It's called oxidative stress. So when trauma exposes polyunsaturates in our membranes, it activates certain enzymes that activates the inflammatory cascade. But it's all driven, so the inflammatory cascade is a bunch of enzymes that become activated and cause the blood clotting and the swelling and the increased blood flow. So you get like a warm, hot, swollen ankle, or you get a fever. All these things are part of the inflammatory cascade. So that will happen anytime there's too much oxidation going on. And so now you can start to see the connection, right? So it's oxidation in the cell membrane, PUFA oxidation in the cell membrane, that triggers this inflammation cascade in the first place. It's just that normally it's only in response to infection or trauma, so it's appropriate and life-saving. But when you have too much PUFA in your body fat, these things can happen inappropriately. When they happen in your lungs, that you can get an asthma attack. Asthma is an inflammatory reaction in your lungs. It's increased blood flow, so you get increased fluid, makes it hard to breathe. You should not have fluid in your lungs. Increased production of mucus, so you cough up a lot of mucus. Narrowing of the airways, so that you can't get air. You can get some air in, but you can't get air out. It makes it hard to breathe. So that's an inflammatory response happening just in your lungs, maybe just in response to something like pollen or dust. We shouldn't react. Our bodies shouldn't react that way to pollen or dust because it's not a life-threatening thing. It's not infection. But when we have asthma, our body responds to these minor triggers as though they are life-threatening because of oxidation. So once you understand how vegetable oils promote oxidation, how oxidation is connected to inflammation, then you can really start to see that this big picture here that medical science has totally overlooked all of these simple explanations for these diseases that they have no other help, no recourse, but to give people drugs to control, right? So the doctors don't want to get people, have to prescribe people asthma inhalers. They would rather help people get to the root cause, but we are not taught the root cause.
Yeah. Great explanation. Thank you so much. So your book is going to be out by the time this podcast airs. So I'm super excited. Where else it's called Dark Calories. And her other book is called FatBurn Fix. So if you struggle with low blood sugar and you want to learn more about that or these symptoms of low blood sugar, that would also be a great book to get. So you have such a phenomenal stack now, Deep Nutrition. So amazing author. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Anything else you wanted to add about where we can find you, follow along with you? I'll link everything in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely. So please come to my website, which is drcate.com. And I would love it if you could sign up to my newsletter, which I release maybe once a month, so I don't flood your inbox with useless ads. But that helps me help you stay up to date on what I've been discovering recently, and also what I'm doing that might help you, like other things that I've created that I create in order to help you stay on this healthy journey. And one of these days I'd love to create a community, but we're working on that one.
Yes, I know there's only so many hours in the day, right? So okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure to link to all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And everyone, go out and get Dr. Cate's book. It's amazing. And thanks again. Take care.
Thank you, Danielle.